All right, it's February 13th, 2025, season 3, episode 1 of That Change Show, and I can't figure out how to open these without sounding like a used car salesperson. I don't know why. As soon as I hit record, it's just like, "Hey, come and watch and join." But
And for every car you buy, I'll eat a bug.
yeah, exactly.
I've stayed up way too late many times.
So I'm just getting over a pretty nasty flu, so hopefully I'll hit mute whenever it comes time to do a giant coughing fit. But as I was thinking of this episode, for those of you who don't know, this is Don Gray, and we've known each other for 15 years almost.
Thereabouts.
I
Thereabouts.
think it was the very first AYE, Amplify Your Effectiveness, that I got shooted into going to. I was working with a fellow named Eric Mead. Do you know Eric?
Basically. Not I don't know him well, but I know him some.
Okay, yeah, he was working as an XP coach in one of the telecoms where I was working as an Agile coach, and I don't know how the topic came up, and he just said, "Yeah, have you ever heard of this AYE thing?" And I'm like, "No, what is it?" And then he told me a little bit about it, and he said, "Yeah, you should go and pick the session that makes you feel the most uncomfortable." And I was like, "All right." So I did, and it was Steve Smith's Satir Curve one, where he had the groups enact all the different parts of the model, and it just scared the complete crap out of me the way that it ran. And I was like, "Oh my God, this is so great!" And that just transformed my whole trajectory as a change agent.
So was that the Satir interaction model?
Yeah,
Oh,
I
that's
was in the status
fun.
quo group, and then there was a star, and then the new status quo had to drag the star across the conference center to a new area, and we
Oh,
had to prevent that from happening. And then it got a little physical. So we looted the hotel for tables and chairs, and we physically built a structure in our corner of the room to keep the person there. And the new status quo was tearing stuff down, and chaos was like banging pots and pans and just yelling and making noise and stuff. And then we started like elbowing each other to put the wall back up, and Steve had to stop the session like 10 minutes in. And it was just like you've got 50 highly enlightened change agents and agile coaches who almost got into a brawl. You just can't control change.
welcome to change. That's pretty accurate, actually.
Yeah, yeah. So I was actually thinking this morning, Don and I did a session at Agile 2012, 13, whenever it
12,
was.
12 on
Uh,
culture.
yeah, in Grapevine, I think. Was it in
Yeah, I think it
Texas?
was Texas. I think it was.
Yeah. And I remember they moved us to a bigger room because of the demand. And I remember you said something like, "Oh, this is perfect. Let's put up a sign that says we've been moved over there, and let's just see what happens." Because the session was basically about how people react to change. And I remember how we asked them not to set up any chairs, just left them in piles, and then we started watching the patterns happen. And it was just like a master class in how people react to changes in the environment. I remember some people were really upset. "Oh, the sign was pointing that way, but if I would have went that way, I would have ran headfirst into a wall. You should have made a better sign." Like just noise and stuff, how people react. I thought it was great. Remember that?
Yeah, so this is Don looking for this. So what we were playing with is um, a landscape.
Hmm.
Okay, so this is looking at agreement and certainty. And so the arrow, where the arrow is, that's the self-organizing zone. And a lot of times when you go to a conference, you end up in this close to certainty, close to agreement. All of the chairs are set up. There's a microphone, a podium. Everything is ready to go because you're close to certainty and close to agreement. In our case, we were at the other end. We had a mess, for lack of a better definition. And we chose to see how the group organized itself and what sort of patterns emerged from it. And yeah, I still smile. But yeah, we were playing with patterns. How a pattern is our similarities, differences, and interactions that create a create a s- well, it creates a pattern that has meaning over time. So if you have a brief, short interaction and then it's done, that's not really a pattern. A pattern gets formed and continues over time until another set of similarities or differences, a different set of exchanges and interactions occurs. And then that's when patterns shift. So that's what we were playing with. And, sometimes it's just fun to stop, let things be disorganized. Now, in our case, we had 3 hours, we had a room, so it wasn't like we were going to ruin the entire conference. If you're working with large scale organizational change, you might not want to approach that from that casual of a, hey, let's do this and see what happens standpoint.
Yeah, yeah. I remember what some people were. They really wanted the chairs set up, and they started putting them in nice rows, and then other people would take the chairs and just kind of put them wherever, and then people who seemed to need a little more structure would nicely organize them, and the system kind of settled itself. And then I don't know, I felt this moment of we need some system intervention to move on past the response. Like it just felt like the group was ready to get started with the session at some point after the kind of the chaos wore off. And the one thing I always remembered from, all the AYEs and the PSLs is there's you can rob people of learning if you help them too much in chaos. Right. Like you should be able to support people through it, but they have to get through it internally.
Yes, we all. So, I mean, well, yes, of course. Almost every parent in the world knows this. There's a tremendous amount of, at least in my case, standing back and going, okay, they'll learn more if I don't get involved. And in fact, we have Esther Derby, who is a colleague of mine. She and I facilitate the problem solving leadership workshop. Our next newsletter for the congruent change is going to be on that exact topic, which is um, don't solve problems for people because you do deprive them of a learning opportunity. I think Marvin's second great secret from Secrets of Consulting by Jerry Weinberg goes something to the effect that's of if you repeatedly cure a system that could cure itself, you'll create a system that will not be able to cure itself. So,
Yeah.
um,
I remember I think it was in the Gift of Time book, um, where somebody told the story, one of Jerry's first, and I wouldn't say first, but early on consulting engagement where he was hired to help programmers debug programs or something like that. And
mhm.
they're working on Reels.
Yes.
And as the story goes, he's sitting beside a programmer who's debugging something that is not the actual program that he's supposed to be working on, but it's close enough. Something like that. And then, Jerry asks him a question and he finds out that it's not the actual program. And he's like, how do you get the other program? And you go, well, it's across the street in the archives, like in the basement and something. And I just don't have time to go get it. And Jerry goes, well, I'll go grab it for you if you need it. And
Mhm.
it was just be useful, but don't fix people.
Be supportive.
Yeah.
Uh, Help work around the edges. Oh, and at some point in time, we should probably share that when we say Jerry, we're referring to Jerry Weinberg.
Mm,
Um, Gerald M. Weinberg, if you care to Google it, great Wikipedia article. Uh, nice website. I can send you the website. It's shifted from where it was. So we were both fortunate in that we got to meet Jerry. I was very fortunate. I worked with Jerry for 14 years on the Amplifying Your Effectiveness conference. And then in 2017, when he was no longer physically able, I was asked to step in and co-facilitate problem solving leadership with Esther. So
mhm.
He holds a very special place in my memory, my heart. He was a
Mm.
wonderful person. Moving along before I start to cry.
Yeah, same. Yeah. So, when we're talking about that, sending people into chaos in that Agile 2012 session, and them getting through it and then finding that moment where it was time to intervene and inject some foreign element into the group to kickstart them into the activity. I think one of the patterns, I guess, that I see in change, because I do see a lot of what I would characterize as traditional change agents, not coming from an agile background, if you will. Um, uh, haven't really been exposed to these ideas, haven't been exposed to complexity thinking, systems thinking, Satir. And when they discover them, they're just like, oh, that's what's missing because there's such a strong desire to help. They tend to put their foot on the gas with a tool and a framework. I don't
Yes.
see this system changing the way my stakeholders who are pressuring me to get it to change. I have to step on the gas when sometimes we need to take our foot off the gas.
So when you think about school, how we are educated, how we learn, uh, pretty much everybody knows about Newton. Newton's laws of motions, very linear thinking. So we come out of our educational years, high school, college, with this idea of, and actually at one point in time I said this, Gray's axiom for success is if it doesn't move, get a bigger hammer. Um, as I've quit saying that as I've gotten older because it really does not work when you deal with people. Um, and every parent knows this. It's amazing how I keep coming back to parenting. Um, but yeah, so we're used to thinking in terms of linear um, relationships. And that gets back to that bottom left-hand corner where you have a finite system, it's closed, there's no extraneous inputs, it's low dimensions, few connections, and it's linear. It says right there in the drawing. Um, that does not adequately describe complex systems. You mentioned complexity. The other corner is where most organizations actually live if they'd care to admit it, because there's massive entanglements between people and work, relationships. It's open to the environment. There's people working inside, outside the company. There's people working across the company into different organizations, different teams, and it's highly nonlinear. The causes of nonlinearity would stem from time delay, which is a standard systems thinking um, item, and then the number of connections of themselves. And so we talk about this thing called the butterfly effect, where you have this little perturbance somewhere in the system, and it's hard to notice. Faint signal is another word for it, weak signal. And then suddenly the entire system shifts. Um, so continuing with the complexity idea. I hadn't come across human systems dynamics when you and I did that session in 2012. That was actually when I started going through the program. And so they have a drawing similar to what I showed you earlier that they call the landscape diagram. In the bottom left, they have stable, and the top right is unstable. Now, within the unstable environment, that area, it does not mean everything's in chaos because there are places of stability, there's places of coherence. That corner simply means these are the places, these are the items that are more likely to shift quickly and with less effort than the items, the functions that are in the bottom left corner.
That's a good point. That's a good, because so many people talk about when you use the word chaos or unstructured or unstable, it's applied to the entire system. And I think part of that is a consequence of just the world that we live in. We seem to jump to the top shelf extreme crisis. Company is going to die. Like just we go right to that end extreme and we blanket the entire system, if it's in telecom, for example, or in consumer products or anything like that, we label the whole system as unstable. It's in disorder, it's in disarray. We need to shift that entire system and we forget that the pockets of those interactions and some of the smaller subsystems within there um, might not need, quote, fixing, but we just observe an outside system and we label the whole thing and try to shift it.
Well, that saves thinking. You don't have to think as
Yeah.
hard when you try to just and labeling. We don't have time to talk about labels. We'll have to schedule that one sometime in the future. You know,
Yeah.
that label show, I'm not sure how far it would go, but
Yeah.
we label things because it makes them easy to separate in our minds. It makes them easier to deal with because you're masking the complexity.
Hmm.
And it's what we do. We're trying to replicate the world in a finite space, which means I'm trying to represent the world in my mind. And it's very limited space. Now it's spectacularly large at the same time, but it I you have to remove items, you have to remove detail when you
Hmm.
model. And
Hmm.
I mean that's basically what a model is it's a simplification of reality.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and backing on that, um, something that um, has been kind of a focus of work that I'm doing with Ken Rickard is this idea of the levers that we pull. So we label a system and we pull the easiest lever. This is why we see so much superficial transformation because we focus on the right side of this. We focus on processes and technologies because they're simple. Anybody can draw like a framework on a napkin.
How hard is Scrum?
Mm.
It's three roles and five ceremonies. Well,
Yeah.
that's what it was back in 2008. I'm not sure where it is today, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Or a tool, piece of tool or technology. And
yeah, yeah.
certainly we see all this with AI nowadays because those are easy. Um, I will say they're easy to measure, even though those measurements typically don't matter or have any real meaning behind them. But you can physically see something. It's like when Agile software development came around, you got to see software sooner,
Hmm.
which gave you the feeling of progress. And then when you start to use these ideas in a non-software context, you can't always observe changes in the system as fast as you can with software changes. So we kind of forget the stuff on the left. And we forget that sometimes it's our structures that are preventing this change from happening. But we make one change in one area, it's going to have that butterfly effect in the other areas.
So let's go back to where you started this conversation. Set the Wayback Machine to 2012. And you just pulled the screen away from me. So you've got the right-hand side, which is processes, technology, the left-hand sides, which were strategies and technology. I'm sorry, strategies and structures. Where would you put culture on that? Where does culture fall?
For me, it emerges from the interactions between these five things.
An emergent property.
Yeah.
Welcome to complexity.
Yeah. Like one organization a long time ago that I was working for, a telecom, we had gone and collected a bunch of data that basically showed that this group, their median delivery time was 12 to 14 months ish. I won't say average, but that was kind of the majority of projects were delivered there. They wanted to do an agile transformation, and the main stakeholder of business transformation was smart enough to know that as soon as you give this thing a schedule and a budget and a name, it ain't going to work because we're going to be focused on fulfilling the budget and the schedule and blah, blah, blah.
That is smart.
And he said, deliver something every 6 months. like really threw an asteroid into the pond, like a very, very strong foreign element. And what happened, like the ripple effects of that was some teams were like, well, fine, we'll just cut our scope. Haha, smarty pants, we met your objective. And he's like, great. It's probably going to take 3 or 4 years, but your stakeholders are going to learn they don't have to wait 14 months to ask for stuff. That's why they ask for so much, because they don't get a ceremony or an opportunity to put changes into the software organization. They're eventually going to learn they're going to reliably get something every 6 months. They're going to ask for less stuff. It's going to force them to prioritize. And it took, 2 to 3 years. Some teams right away, they were able to deliver stuff sooner,
Yeah.
depending on their context and stuff. But I think it's just the way he was attenuated to the system was he just knew the reaction it was going to have. And we often try to not want that reaction because we label that as resistance.
Yes. Resistance is so you're reminding me of a paper by Donald Schoen or Schern, based on how you pronounce his last name, Donald Schoen, if you don't know the umlaut O. Dynamic conservatism, which is from 1976. Um, and he highlights a lot of things in organization about organizational change, why they don't change. And I was reading it, first time I saw the paper was late 24. I'm going, why, yes, I recognize every one of these. We are still doing this. It's a fantastic paper. I'll try and get you a copy of it. You can find it on the internet, but if it makes it easier, I can just send you a copy so that people can access it. Um, but resistance means I don't see the value in what you want me to do. Everybody, you were back to AYE session on uh, change, chaos. Everybody has something they value. And when you put them through the change cycle, or when you ask them to change, um, many people are afraid of loss. They've done research, psychological research, that says people are more afraid of loss than they hope for gain. I forget exactly what the bias is. We could look it up if it's important. But this is a documented fact of the way most people, most of the time, process gain and loss. So if I think I'm going to lose something and then change, somebody always loses. They lose status, they lose power, they lose position. Um, and I haven't even talked about valuable stuff, like work and getting value to the clients. I'm talking about internal processing. So yeah, that's
And
why a large amount of I'll be honest, I've never worked on a large transformation that succeeded
mm,
because people were always trying to transform everything all at once instead of taking little slices like the gentleman you referred to and says, well, just 6 months. Let's go for 6 months and see what we do in 6 months.
mhm,
Making smaller slices instead of trying to eat the whole elephant at one time.
mhm. Yeah, yep. It that that there we underestimate the value in the response people have to change. Like when we just blanket it with resistance,
Oh, yeah.
there's a lot of good data in how people are reacting to changes in the environment. And that's the data that we use into, let's just call it the next planning cycle or the next set of experiments or the next things that we want to do, because it's almost better. I would rather have a lot of people upset about the foreign element than for nobody to care, right? Apathy is worse.
Yeah.
So, we flipped it and
You,
say,
you don't know if they're interested. You don't know if they're not interested. You don't know if they're on board, off board. You get
yeah.
nothing. There's no energy to work with.
Yeah, yeah. And that same telecom, I went and worked in another division a few years later, where every year, like clockwork in January, they did a reorg. So then there's, the response to that was always apathetic. You talk to people and they go, well, I report to Biff instead of Sally, but I do the same thing. So I don't know.
Yeah.
But they would do that just to shake the system up and to try to get people to think differently about their work. But it wasn't strong enough to do anything meaningful. They just kind of shuffled the org chart around a little bit. Um, you know, so, but nobody was ever upset. They just expected it. It was a norm in the system, and it didn't really have any meaning for people.
And going in similar to that, I worked in a large internet company, or I worked with a large internet company, and they had layoffs every 90 days. And they had a horrendous WIP problem,
Mhm.
work in process. Could not get the teams to, it's like, you only got this much done last time. You had that much on your plate. Now you got to finish that WIP on your plate, and you're taking that much more. Why? And we never did actually figure it out, but we suspect that the fact that you're getting somebody near you or you will be gone in 90 days.
Mm,
And it was a way of looking important, a way of looking like you were providing value.
yeah,
It was a facade, but it was something that people could do to feel more comfortable and hope that they would not be the one who found the door.
right.
We've been talking about the change model, Satir change model specifically. We've thrown out foreign element, we've thrown out chaos. Would it be okay if I showed a quick picture of that?
Yes, I think it'd be important to talk about that. And then also, we've used the word congruent a few times. I think some people know what that is, but I think it would be useful because there's a good piggyback on what you just talked about congruency when it comes to too much whip in your system.
So, one of the things Jason and I have been referring to is a model that was created by Virginia Satir. Virginia was a family therapist, and her major contribution, she had a lot of contributions, but she was the first therapist in the 50s who said, what we really need to do is treat the family as a unit. Instead of Johnny coming to me and we work with Johnny and Johnny's fine when he hits the door, but when he gets home, he reverts back to his original behavior. And so she started treating um, patients in the family unit and the family as a whole. And this model comes from Virginia Satir. This is called the change model, where we have the first area called the late status quo, where things are in Jason's example. It's now January 1st. You have had 11 months to get used to the latest change, and we're now pretty much just cruising along. Everything is happening. The foreign element, January 1st, we're going to reorg, and that throws everything into this period of uh, time called chaos. The foreign element can be a reorg. Your company could get bought. It could be new tax tables if you're involved or new tax laws. So you have to go and do things. It could be a trade show that you now have to buff some sort of a prototype for. So transforming elements come in many varieties. In a period of chaos, you just kind of try to cope as best you can. And then after a while, somebody gets what's we refer to as the transforming idea. And it's, during this period of chaos, you're doing multiple things. Some things get you a little better, some things don't, but eventually you've got enough knowledge in the new domain or the new culture, the new system, that you can start a period of integration and practice. And then you get to the early status quo. And that's where things are finally humming. It's now October 1st, and you're cranking happily along. And the early status quo turns into the late status quo. So it's a cycle. It's a continuous cycle. It's not a one and done. A lot of times, it's my impression that organizations thinks, well, we're going to make this change, and then we're done. It doesn't happen that way in the world. The context changes, your competitors change, your users change, your people change. So change is a constant. One of the observations is the longer you've been in late status quo, the more difficult the foreign element is going to hit you. It's going to be more difficult to change. So when Jerry's writing, he was saying, somewhere around here is a good time to think about having another change, because it's change, like any other skill or practice or habit, is the more you do it, the better you get at it. So that's the Satir Change Model. Up top, excellent book, Managing Transitions by William Bridges. Comes up with 3 steps. He's got the ending. Ending comes with a certain amount of loss. And then there's the neutral zone where you're trying to figure things out. And then you start the new beginning.
Mhm.
So once again, it's cyclical. You mentioned repeating every year. One of the models, actually, it's a method from Human Systems Dynamic that I like, is adaptive action, which has 3 parts. What, so what, now what?
Mm.
It's and as soon as you get done with now what, you're back at what. And so it's got the built-in cyclical nature of change and working in small bites.
Hmm. Hmm. And the interesting thing that I liked about when you were talking about early status quo and late status quo, that little box was it was, I think it was the first AYE. And everybody had the opportunity to do one-on-ones with everybody. So with you and Johanna and Esther and Steve and Jerry. And I remember I was having my one-on-one with Esther, and it was like 4 days in or something. I think it was Wednesday afternoon. So it was
Yeah.
already like 4 days of just brain explosion. And I remember saying something stupid like, how can I go back and inflict this on my organization and get them to change because this is so good? And all she said was, Jason, it isn't about you. And that box got my brain thinking about the window of opportunity. Because when you talk about, when's the best time to do a new change, well, it's kind of in that box is a good spot. But how do you know? And you know by feel. You feel the window of opportunity opening. You can see body language. You can see, people don't appear to be as stressed out. You can feel the shininess wearing off from the early status quo by how you're interacting with people and stuff. And then it's kind of a good time to gather some new insights, figure out some new options, and move forward. But it doesn't work on a timetable.
Well, it does not. And so you talked about the best time to attempt or to start another small change. This area right here is the absolute worst time.
Mm.
Now, the Lord High Ruler of the company has sent out the edict that, yes, we are going to be agile. And so they kick it off. And so there's the foreign element. And suddenly everybody is now doing Scrum. And I am not hammering Scrum per se. I'm not against Scrum. It has its place in the world, but it doesn't belong everywhere in the world. But so you spend a bunch of money, and then you're right about here, and things are horrible. People are unhappy. I'm spending all my time in meetings. I'm not getting anything done. Oh, and if you have a matrixed organization, I once worked with a client out in California, and they had this very important guy who was on 3 different teams. He was spending 60% of his work week in meetings
Mm.
and wondering why no work was getting done. Uh, so if you put a foreign element right here, I don't know if they can see my cursor or not, you've introduced a new foreign element, which means your productivity, your performance goes even lower.
Yeah.
And eventually you keep stacking these things and you're off the chart. So
Crashing in chaos.
yeah, crashing in
Yeah.
chaos.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Um,
So the last thing I wanted to add on top of that was because you started a story with or part of the Satir model with that foreign element could be a reorg, it could be company got bought, etc. And it reminded me of a story when I was doing a workshop at the end of day one. It was with a boutique consulting firm over in Australia. I don't remember how many people, maybe 80, 90 people in the organization. And at the end of day one, they got summoned to the all hands meeting at 6 p.m. that night. And then the next morning, everybody came in just white as a ghost. They had been acquired by gigantic consulting firm number one. And everybody was like, oh, those idiots, they don't know how to run a blah, blah, blah. And this sucks and blah, blah, blah. So we did this little activity, which beginning of day two was actually talking about the Satir stuff. And I was like, okay, this is awesome, but I don't want to use the model. I don't want to go now. See here, the foreign element made you blah 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 because what had been put in place, and again, this was from you guys in PSL and AYE. What has been put in place with emotion cannot be undone with logic.
Oh no.
You've got to
Oh
deal with that.
yes. Absolutely.
Yeah, you have to deal with that response. So we did this little activity. So think of a change that you did. What was your reaction, response to it? Just the emotion. So it was, well, some were excited, they felt empowered, confusion, some were a little scared, and then what was your reaction when you heard about being acquired? So something you didn't have control over. And it was loss of control, annoyed, shock, but optimism. And it was kind of a conversation around we always assume negative reaction to change, but it's not true. They don't go into shock, denial, anger, frustration for every foreign element that comes into the system. Some people might just be waiting for that foreign element to happen. They're like, finally, the shackles are off, and I'm excited about this. And
Yeah.
and we often underestimate that. And that's the people, those are the movers we want to latch onto because they are going to be um, the informal change agents, if you want to call it that are going to help other people through chaos, or at least help spread, the goodness about the change.
Yeah.
So I wanted to, I assume people are thinking about this. They're wondering, what the heck is that background that you've got going on there? Is that all the rivers that you've been kayaking down?
It's no, it's my impression of a Native American firebird. Let me see. So I've been thinking about change for a while. Let me see. I think it's that one. Nope, wasn't that one. Somewhere here. Let's come to it. So this is my mind map of change. Let's see. Somewhere here we can. That's what it looks like. This was my attempt to hide the mess of my office behind me. And so that's Don's mind map of change. And um, what's interesting is the distinction between a map and a model, or a map and a method. A map simply says this is the territory. These are the mountains. These are the rivers. There's a road that goes here. There's a destination over there. It doesn't tell you how to do anything.
Hmm.
It just identifies stuff. So there's a lot of things on here. I started it in like 2011. I've made some adjustments to it recently. And this is by no means everything that's involved with change. This is my view of it. Um, Other views exist and are every bit as valid. Um, but this is based on, I don't know, I've been coaching consulting for 20 years. I was doing software development for the 20 years before that. So this is sort of a synopsis.
Hmm.
Um,
Do the
and
colors represent something? Categories, themes,
uh,
ideas?
it just difference.
Oh, just difference?
It just means this branch is different than that branch.
Okay.
I guess I could do that, but that would involve a lot of time, and then I would start to make categories, and it would reveal how my mind models stuff and how I clump things together.
Yeah.
Um, and it
And
would
then
be
you
over,
have then you have a
I would
trademark
be
framework.
inflicting help. And we've learned that we do not want to, if we get nothing else out of this session today, don't solve other people's problems for them.
Yeah,
Be
yeah,
useful, assist when possible, but let them figure it out.
yeah, yeah, yeah. People ask that about where's the framework diagram for lean change and why is it called lean change? I said because how Jason's brain works, nobody's going to buy a book called that. This is my worldview. This is how I see stuff. This is what it's
Yeah.
influenced by, and there you go. I can't tell you how to do it, but I can give you some clues.
All right. I think we're about the end of our time.
Yes, we are. So tell
But I've
everybody what
got
you've got.
14 more things to talk about.
Oh man, I could go. Yeah, I've mentioned this a million times. It's, in all the books, all of my thinking is influenced from the five of you. And not a day goes by, and I mean that sincerely, that I don't think about something that happened at one of those sessions. Something that just comes into my brain and goes, maybe I wasn't thinking about that the right way. Maybe there's this thing or this door I can open. It's the gift that keeps on giving. So I know you've got one coming up in April or May, PSL.
Mapril. Actually, Mapril is correct.
Yay.
The problem solving leadership workshop, next one is scheduled for March 30th through April 4th.
Okay. And it's in Albuquerque again?
It's in Albuquerque, New Mexico. You can find more about that. Go to congruentchange.com and then look. We never did get to congruence. We have to come back together.
Oh, right.
We
Yeah,
didn't
we do.
talk about finished conversation about congruence.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, congruentchange.com. And then you can go to workshops, and the first workshop that pops up is problem solving leadership, which we refer to as PSL for short.
Yes. And all of this stuff will be in show notes. So if you're listening on the podcast, you can go to thatchangeshow.com or leanchange.tv if you want to see the video version of it. And all the links, AI summaries, all that fun stuff will be in the show notes.
All right.
Any final thoughts or words or what change agents should be doing to be more effective?
Uh, that's a whole nother episode. That's not a conclusion, that's a segue.
Yeah, exactly. This will be part one of two.
Well, you don't know that. It could be one of N.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So where else can people find you on LinkedIn, social media, stuff like that? And I'll put that in the show notes as well if they want to get in
LinkedIn,
touch.
Donald E. Gray. There is a Congruent Change web page on LinkedIn. So if you look for Congruent Change on LinkedIn, it should take you to the page. Let's see. Actually, I'm on Mastodon. I have left Twitter or X or whatever you call it. So I've gone to Mastodon, and cleverly is Donald D. Gray, and my website, donalddgray.com. I
Right on.
may be wrong, but at least I'm consistent.
Yes. All right. Well, thanks so much for taking the time. Enjoy the wonderful weather. We'll enjoy the 1.5 feet of snow and
Yeah.
up here in the Great White North, and we will chat again soon. So thanks for taking the time.
Thank you for having me. Have a great day.
You too.